I'm Michelle Wong of Active Wellness. Welcome to Let's Live Actively, where we help you build your health and longevity plan through focused, expert conversations, exploring the science and strategies to build resilience and help you live well at every stage of life. Welcome to Let's Live Actively and our episode today on strength training for longevity. Today I'm joined by John Ford, Chief Product Officer for EGYM, a company helping reshape how we think about strength training, personalized fitness, and long-term health outcomes through smart technology and data-driven programming. John has spent years working at the intersection of fitness innovation, technology, member engagement, and scalable wellness solutions. He has helped organizations create more personalized, accessible, and effective approaches to improving long-term health, performance, and quality of life. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that introduction really doesn't do you justice. So I wanted to put that out there. I know that's very brief. So really quickly for our listeners, just so they have a full understanding of where you're at, can you give them a little bit of background on, you've got this extensive experience in the fitness industry and developing, creating, and using technology to improve the experience for fitness, but maybe talk a little bit about what you're really doing today at EGYM, a company that makes some really cool strength training equipment we're using, and what you're doing to elevate the experience in terms of from a longevity lens.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. From a background perspective, I would say like the unifying thread across all my work for the last 20 years has been figuring out how to make exercise more effective and doable, enjoyable, sustainable for people who might typically struggle a bit to keep up with the routine and to exercise effectively. So that's the unifying thread. What I'm doing today at EGYM is very much a continuation of that work. And we have a line of smart strength equipment that is essentially answering all the questions for you that you might have around how to strength train. And so you could imagine a line of 20 pieces of strength training machines covering all the major muscle groups. And when you approach the machine, you would tap in with RFID band or NFC chip on your phone, and then it would set up for you automatically. So it knows what resistance you need, it knows your seat position, and the seat automatically moves into place. It knows the range of motion that you need, and there's a screen that guides you through the repetitions. And so what we're working on here is making it really, really easy for people to safely and effectively strength train, even if they have no experience. We're having really great success with that, and it's really enjoyable work. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. It's been great for us. We've been working on some special pilot projects together, our two organizations, Active Wellness and EGYM, and looking at how we bring strength training to individuals who maybe are not our members in our centers and introduce them to it in a way that's unintimidating, works within the time they have in their lifestyle. So we're going to get into that today about some things around the minimum effective dose, especially as we talk about centering our conversation today, really gearing at folks who haven't adopted strength training as a consistent part of their routine and their training program, and thinking about it through the lens of everything that's in our toolkits nowadays in longevity, right? Strength training is front and center of the conversations. You and I see it all the time at fitness industry conference, as well as, I'm out there going to just health conferences for, the average individual. And it's really front and center of the conversation, as well as some of the other tools that have emerged along lines of medications and GLP-1s. And we're going to get into that today and talk about how those things really need to be paired together. The tools we've always had, strength training, but, maybe with some smart and sophisticated equipment, and some of the medications and the importance of those, working together hand in hand. So to start us off a little bit, talk about your view of where strength training fits in and why it's so important in terms of health span and longevity.
Yeah, it's been so refreshing actually seeing over the last, I would say, 5 years, maybe 10 years, the rise of strength training and the general acknowledgement how important it is to longevity and health span. I feel like we're in an age of the podcasts, of health influencers, and And so many of these experts now have locked in to strength training as one of the key solutions, and they're communicating that message widely now. And I think, the two main drivers, maybe three, are really about the recognition on how strength training impacts blood sugar control and insulin sensitivity, and then metabolic health in general. So how it can support sustainable weight loss and a healthier form of weight loss. And then the last one being, of course, just functional movement and being capable to do the things that you want and need to do throughout the day as you age. So, there's great awareness now of all three of those pillars, and I think that's what's driving all of the interest from a longevity perspective around strength.
Yeah, I think it's great for us in our industry. I know you've talked about it a lot. We're always trying to get to what we say is that elusive 80%, right? Engaging people who are not, typically engaged in athletics or sports or fitness. And it's been so hard. And I do think there's a growing awareness that, strength training is important. And what you do, what I do, we're a resource for that, making it approachable for people. But then there's also this other piece of this is there's these tools and medications to help people who are metabolically unhealthy, weight is an issue. And I don't see it. I don't know what your perspective is. I don't see these conversations coming together enough. And these being viewed as both being essential together. And, just to share some of the stats and the research and what we're seeing out there is folks that go on GLP-1 medications, I don't care where you read it in the literature or if you talk to the companies that are dispensing it, they sort of tell you up front, people regain 2/3 of their weight. And I think some of that issue is, ultimately the business we're in is behavior change, is that these medications are being given without, a true avenue or prescription for exercise or an outlet for that. And the actual, instilling the behavior change so that those outcomes are better, right? I don't think it needs to be 2/3 weight regain, and strength training being a key piece in that. And so what's your view on that? Because I know that's my view personally,
Sure.
right? There's a gap there.
Yeah, I do hear some discussion about it, but you and I aren't always operating in the same sort of information sphere that the general public is, right? So while I hear a lot in my day-to-day about how important strength training is for GLP-1s, and I push this message myself, I'm not sure that the message is getting down to all of the consumers with the right strength and importance. And so I'm fully in agreement here with you. I think it's a message we need to make much more emphatically to these GLP-1 consumers.
Yeah. So I think that's great. And what we can do here today is close that gap a little bit, share that. And so in thinking about it, I look at it and I was thinking back, like, how do you explain this to somebody who maybe is missing or not understanding that connection? And I look at it is it's understanding two key mechanisms, right? So when you're trying to lose weight or improve your metabolic health, and looking at that, there's two key signaling pathways that you have to make sure are in place. And one is telling your body that muscle is essential and is important so that you're, maintaining that best metabolic efficiency, and then nutrition and this other pathway of signaling to say again muscles is key and important. So I want to dive into those two key pathways today and importance of signaling, and obviously talk about the strength training, but then also dive in a little bit about how nutrition is a big factor in that as well, and again telling your body that muscle is essential and what are some of the minimum effective doses. And I think that's where we can start to, close the gap on the missing links and the missing pieces. So in terms of that, what are you seeing as far as, I think you guys are looking at this and doing some research on, let's set the stage of like, what is there a minimum effective dose, if you're looking to lose weight or improve or just, reserve the muscle that you have, how much effort does that really take?
Yeah. This is something that we're actually in the process of multiple clinical studies covering this topic to try to drill down on really the specifics of what sort of efficacy can you expect from what sort of volume. This is a very important topic for EGYM from a product perspective, because we want to make sure that we're personalizing the training in a way that it drives the best possible results given someone's motivation level and profile, right? And so we're studying this topic, and we don't have, the final answer yet, but there's already plenty of research out there to to make the statement that number one, any amount of volume helps, anything is helpful, and also that the volume that is needed to provide a substantial benefit is much, much less than the typical non-expert believes, right? I think that for many, many decades now, we've sort of all as an industry reinforced this message that you need to come in and you need to put in the work. And the work looks like at least a couple times a week, coming to the gym for at least 45 minutes to an hour and getting your gym workouts in. And I think that while it's true that that might be a good sort of minimum for producing close to the best possible results for a person, it might not be where that person's at today. In terms of their ability to commit and adhere, and they could probably get substantial benefit from much, much less than that. And so those two things I think are leading us towards a lot of interest in minimum effective dose solutions, because we believe that the biggest challenge these folks have is sticking with a routine, whatever it is. And given that we know they're going to get benefit as long as they're getting real resistance, they're actually challenging their muscles a bit, then we should start where they're starting and not try to give them, more challenge than they can take on day one.
Yeah, I agree with that in the standpoint of, I think as an industry, we've almost done ourselves a disservice where we've said, if you're not here with us 3 to 5 days a week, or, hitting the hardest class for an hour, you're not successful. And so we've done ourselves a disservice in, maintaining our members and retaining them, right? Attrition is a huge issue in our industry because we haven't given everybody the picture of what personalized success looks like, right? It's
Yeah.
not a one size fits all model. And to your point, any amount is going to be beneficial, right? We say this over and over, the best exercise is the one you'll do. But I also think we make it's been intimidating. And what I love about EGYM is you're taking the intimidation factor out. And I think thinking about it as a starting point, the type of equipment we're talking about, which we think about selectorized equipment, which, historically has been used in bodybuilding, not just for beginner exercisers, but for beginner exercisers, it really is a great entry point. And this is why fitness centers and clubs that, take the guesswork out of it are so important. So maybe talk a little bit about, let's share, why is it different going to a gym that maybe doesn't have an e-gym but has another type of selectorized equipment? Why is that a great place to start versus just trying to pick up a few dumbbells in your house?
Yeah, it's before I jump into that, I really resonated with me what you just said about the disservice that our industry is doing to itself based on trying to get people to come in 3 to 5 times a week out of the gate. And I just wanted to mention that, I've heard so many times speaking to over the years, speaking to strength training experts, hardcore muscle guys, this type, about how they're just shocked every time they work out with a newbie for a couple weeks and see this newbie just like gaining muscle like crazy from lifting like weights like 4 times, right? So everybody knows about newbie gains who knows anything about strength training, and everybody knows it just doesn't take that much volume as long as you're putting in, some real work, there's some real weight involved. And yet we still, you ask that same person who just was commenting about the crazy newbie gains, you ask the same person, what should a newbie do when they're getting started? Oh, they should, let's start with like 3 to 4 times a week, an hour session. It's like, it's the same answer, right? Every
Yep.
time. And so I think it's just such an important message around starting people off on something that's sustainable for them, and let them get passionate about strength training before we try to get them to make a commitment that they're going to have trouble sticking with. But yeah, back to your question on the benefits of selectorized style of training. This is something that we've had an information challenge with at EGYM as well, because anytime you have, premium strength training equipment, high quality product, you're making a lot of claims about effectiveness and these sorts of things. You get people in the exercise world, who have the very reasonable opinion, like, oh, well, people should be doing more functional training work It's more beneficial for functional movement and, stabilizing muscles and, all these other things, which, these concepts are 100% true. But it's very similar to the minimum effective dose discussion. We can't start people off with what is, absolutely 100% the optimal solution for their body. We have to start them off with what can they do, what can they stick with that produces great benefit for them. And that's the mix of sort of efficacy and usability that we need to always figure out when we're talking about a beginner. And selectorized style of machines just feel and are safer and more comfortable for total beginners to use. And like I said, and they still get great benefit from using them. And so I think they're a really important tool. There are, of course, use cases for more advanced exercisers for this style of training as well, but especially for beginners, they're a critical strength training tool in my view.
Yeah, and when we talk about like the minimum effective dose or what it looks like, you and I have worked together to design programs where it might be 6 minutes, 6 exercises, 3 rounds, and all the guesswork is taken out, and you do that, a couple of times a week, and that's when we go back to that's a signal.
Yep.
That's telling your body that that muscle is needed and important, and the gains are going to be so much greater in somebody who's been a non-exerciser than somebody who is. And, I think about it and I have this in my head a lot, when I was going through my graduate program, my exercise phys professor and, our section on weight loss, he was like, look, your body doesn't see muscle as essential. When you're thinking about weight loss, your brain, your heart, your lungs, those are the essential things. And unless you tell your body and you do something to tell your body that, your bicep, your quad is essential, it's not essential,
Yep.
and so that's this missing gap between what's happening in these tools that we have in the toolkit around improving metabolic health and weight management and the traditional tools we've had of strength training and bringing that all together. And in an ideal world, what I would love to see is that as these, prescriptions are being given out, is that there's also a prescription for exercise and maybe some habits, right? Because what we know is getting to that 2/3 regain and making that stat better is if we can get people to form that habit even a couple times a week, as little as, 6 minutes, 8 minutes of that signal could make that outcome much better. And so that being really that critical thing of these things need to be paired together. And I don't see it paired together, right? I'm not seeing it. I went to a women's health summit last month and all kinds of conversations around the differences in the role of strength training for women and the impact on muscle and bone mass and as we age and breakout sessions. And one of them was on GLP-1 and the room was packed, standing room only. And there was no conversation in there about if you're starting this medication, if you're using it, if it's a weight loss, longevity, whatever the purpose is, that strength training needs to be paired with it as a critical piece. It just wasn't really part of the conversation. So again, same conference, so much being talked about, and it just wasn't being brought together. So I'm really, that's one of my goals today, is really try to bring it all together and help people realize that they've got to pick from multiple tools in the toolkit when they're approaching this. So one of the things that you and I've had conversations about is this idea of exercise snacks. So I think we're both in alignment. The selectorized equipment, what we can do for people in our centers is really key. But let's talk a little bit also about day-to-day life. And you mentioned it a little bit about this metabolic signaling, improved insulin sensitivity, glucose control. How do you view exercise snacks, and tell us what an exercise snack is, in helping with that piece of the equation?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of exercise snacks. I do them myself quite frequently. I have some selectorized dumbbells and a bench right next to my desk, and I take a break, do a set. That's an exercise snack. A little bit of movement, could be with weights, could be not. Something with body weight, something simple, but just to get moving and to maybe challenge your muscles a bit. And one of the known impacts is, of course, increased insulin sensitivity and better glucose control. There are others as well. There are proven mental clarity benefits, energy levels, alertness, these sorts of things. And so quite a range of positive effects from something that's really simple and easy. One of the things that we're trying to figure out at EGYM is how we can apply the exercise snack concept in a corporate environment for employees And one of the key solves there with EGYM, with real strength training equipment being involved, is what we're trying to solve for is an exercise snack that actually incorporates real resistance and real muscle challenge, but safely and scalably, right? So you can't just plop down a bunch of weights in front of an office full of employees. Most of them won't know what to do with the weights, and not the right solution for unsupervised environment. And but what we also know is that while you can get away with a fairly low volume routine, if especially if you're a beginner, you're going to have just dramatically less efficacy impact on your health if you're not actually challenging your muscles when you do movement, right? So I think one of the traps that we fall into when we are designing sort of easy onboarding programs for beginners is we don't provide a way for them to actually challenge the muscle. You can do that either through so much volume that it's challenging, I mean, so many repetitions that it's challenging, or you can do that through enough resistance to where it's becomes challenging quite quickly. But you have to do one or the other if you want any sort of physiological response. And I think a lot of times we end up in programs where people are kind of just moving but not challenging. And this has, I'm sure, some benefit as well. It's probably not zero, but it's certainly not what we need for an effective, in my view, minimum effective dose program. And so that's a big area of focus for us is how do we take the exercise snack, but also make it low volume, but challenging, right?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is right. So many programs that are for beginners, or a lot of times, are built on exercise endurance, muscle endurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about you start to get over 15 repetitions, that's muscle endurance. That's almost veering on the side of cardiovascular versus, if we think about program design, what I would think about is your 8 to 12 repetitions where, you couldn't do two more after that set of 8 to 12, and maybe you do 3 sets. That is, muscle building, and, what even up to about 15, what you think of maybe bodybuilders, and where it's going for women as we age is they're saying you got to be under 6 reps. You got to be where you've got no more than 2 reps left in you, because you want to be building strength and you want to be challenging your neurological system, which is leading to brain health. And
Yeah.
so when we think about dose and what's effective, what you're talking about is if you can do 20, you're really not doing strength training. You're training a certain type of muscle fiber that's really just built on endurance, and you're not training that system.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying resonates. I would just say that I actually think that there's good physiological responses from both challenging volume and challenging resistance level. Both can be highly beneficial. I think the problem is that a lot of users just aren't doing either, right? They're doing something that's maybe 15 or 20 reps, and they could have done 15 more or 20 more,
Yeah.
right? And so that's what we need to solve for, is just making sure that we're challenging the muscle on one dimension or the other, volume or resistance or both. And I think the other thing about high volume routines is that remember, we're solving for behavior. High volume routines are more tedious, right? And so not all, but many exercisers find high repetition sets to be more grueling, right? Your muscles start to fatigue as you get into the middle of the set, and you're doing more sort of semi-fatigued reps, and you have a lot more to go, and you're kind of counting in your head. And I would describe it as this. Me personally, and this, again, this isn't everybody, everyone has a different motivation profile, but me personally, I find it much easier to do 4 heavy reps than to rep out on a very lightweight until I just can't do anymore, right? I would find that completely grueling to ask me to do, 50 reps at a weight that's going to make it hard for me to do, 51 or 52. That's like the torture version of exercise, right? I'd much rather do 4 heavy reps. And so I think we need to find an in between for beginners. We'd also don't want them maxing out, in 3 reps or something. But I think that in between is important. It's important we get the balance of resistance and volume correct from a motivational perspective. But then again, to reiterate, to make sure that we're at least challenging them on one of those 2 dimensions.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think when you talk about getting into that fatigue and that higher volume, you also have to be careful about form breaking down, right? And we're
Yeah,
talking about selectorized equipment helping with that. But the idea that, you biggest thing too, you don't want to get injured, right? And you want to
that's
make
right.
sure that, your joints are protected and you're doing things in proper form. And when you get to that place of, fatigue, form breaks down.
Yep.
So that
Absolutely.
being part of the challenge there. You have a very great perspective on the value of fitness assessment. And I want to bring this in a little bit here because again, when we're talking about protecting muscle and is the signal doing the right thing, one of the things that we have a challenge with is encouraging our members and making sure that they're coming in for their onboarding sessions with us. They're coming to our fit test weeks. And, we get it, right? We don't want to be assessed or we don't want to be told that, our body fat percentage is a little bit high. We're all there. But talk about your view of the importance of that as a piece of this equation and validating this signal that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's another weapon in the motivation fight, which I'll just keep saying it and again. It's most of the fight is how do we motivate folks to train regularly? And I think assessment is a huge part of that because a good assessment can set exercisers up to see quantitatively gains quite quickly. So one of the things that we see on the EGYM equipment, for example, the EGYM equipment assesses your maximum strength on your first use. So we're giving them 1 RM strength tests after a short warm up. And once we have those, what we see from our users that over a period of weeks, they're able to push as we retest dramatically more, like significantly more weight. We're seeing, like plus 25% in the first 3 months. And those sorts of maximum strength gains, in large part neuromuscular and not necessarily representing like more functional muscle. But to the user, it doesn't matter. What they're seeing is I can push more now, whether it's they're more comfortable and they're more neuromuscularly activated or whether they've built a ton of muscle. In the end, to the user, all they see is I'm becoming stronger. And there is nothing more effective in building up and driving intrinsic motivation than seeing fairly fast outcomes. Okay, I'm here, I'm putting in this work, and I'm actually seeing the results. I'm stronger than I was 2 weeks ago. This is really cool. That gets people coming back and sticking with their routine and understanding the benefit. And I think that's the main reason why assessment is important so that we can solve for that value problem, the outcomes problem, because people won't see huge changes in their body in the first few weeks. But if you can show them 3 weeks after they started that, hey, you may look similar to how you looked before, but look, you're already pushing 5 pounds more than you did the first day, like clearly your body is changing. And this is such an important message for a new starter.
Yeah, I think and people can see then tie that back to what they're experiencing in real world life, right?
Yeah.
Like it's easier to lift that extra bag of groceries out of the car or that flight of stairs becomes easier. I think the other thing too is the body composition piece being so important. And again, another way of reframing what success looks like. If somebody is starting on a GLP-1 and we can see no change in muscle mass over, right? Because you just said it, we're not going to see big changes in short periods of time. But if we see no change and we're maintaining, that's positive change,
That's
especially
right.
if you're starting a weight loss program. If you can preserve your lean mass and you're seeing, even if it's small declines in body fat percentage, you've done something really right in the program, in the plan. And so
Absolutely.
that's another piece of the assessment that, again, we do this as part of our fit test weeks, as part of our member onboarding. I get it, right? People don't want to step on that scale, but it's so important in just to get and understand where your baseline is so that you can say, hey, am I doing something effective? And again, no change might be effective.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. So we said we're going to talk about two parts in signaling, one being the strength training. We did that. The other piece being the protein. So we're also hearing a lot about the need for protein intake. And so I want to touch on that a little bit because again, if we're saying, hey, it's important to preserve lean muscle and gain muscle as you're aging, strength training is a big piece of that. The other piece is nutrition and diet, and that if you don't have adequate amounts of protein, you're just not going to maintain that lean mass. And so do you have a view on that? I know there's, lots being shared of, hey, it's, 1 gram per pound of body weight is a good target for a lot of people, that may be a lot. What's your view of how you incorporate that piece in?
Yeah, it's definitely consensus opinion. Everyone on GLP-1s and everyone who's trying to gain and build muscle should be making sure that they get plenty of protein, or I should say, everyone in general should get plenty of protein. And what I do myself is I do a couple of shakes. I do like lean meats, these sorts of things that I incorporate. I'm not a nutrition expert by any means, but But I do fully agree with you that it's such a simple message. It's one of the macros that's easy, kind of easier to incorporate, I think, is just get some extra protein. There are lots of ways to do it. And it's such an important part of just making sure that GLP-1 consumer doesn't burn more muscle than they need to. I mean, it's such a shame if they're it's much easier to solve for getting a bit of extra protein than it is to get them to train, right? But both are important, and so we certainly wouldn't want them to train and not get the protein. That would be a bummer.
Yeah, in terms of guidance around this, what we're seeing and what's coming out of the research is that, and I know a lot of the companies that are prescribing GLP-1s, they're saying 30 grams at a meal as a minimum, or targeting on sort of the performance, and, upwards of 1 gram per pound of lean body weight, like your ideal, like what would your ideal body weight be? So if you're, 160 pounds, but you should be about 140, then, right, trying to target up to that amount and looking at it as a dose so that it's more closely that 30 or 40 grams in a meal, if you're getting that closely tied in with your strength training. The consensus is for women probably within 45 minutes. Men maybe have a little bit of a larger window for that, but having that, really looking as a dose, and protein in itself being a natural GLP-1 stimulator, right? Sending out those satiety hormones. And so even if you're not looking at a medication, but how do I get some of the benefits of what a GLP-1 is providing? Protein, two effects, right? It's going to signal muscle is important. We need to preserve it. We need to build it, but it's also going to help signal and regulate those hunger hormones, right? So that you're not feeling hungry as often, you're able to go a little bit longer, you have, less insulin needed in terms of, response to a meal, all of those things, that benefits that has. And it can be any form, right? It plant-based, we're not going to do a deep dive here, but what types of plant-based proteins are complementary, so you're getting your full amino acid mix, and lean meats, and I think variety really can become key. And then where it's harder to get that. You talked about it, right? I supplement with protein, whey protein in the mornings before my workouts. And, it's really hard to meet that with just, food alone. But the goal is always, whole foods first. And then where you need to add it in to, get it done, it's, having some good, clean protein supplements.
Yeah, I agree. Great points.
Yeah. So, John, we always tie these things up by asking our guests, what are you doing to live actively? Tell us a little bit about your program and your routine. And so, what else would you like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, so personally, I play a lot of soccer. I'm on an outdoor team and an indoor team, and then that gives me also the motivation because I'm getting older. I'm playing the over 40 league now, and the interesting thing about the over 40 league is there's a huge difference between 40 and 46 where I'm at now. And so I immediately when I step on the field, I can see the Jarek, he's 40. He just turned 40. I know it. They just move differently, right? Like I used to 6 years ago. And so it motivates me to do the other training that I do, which is, I do my exercise snacks. I do a couple of sessions where I lift a bit more, and then I like to, when the weather isn't too bad up here in Seattle, I like to get outside and go for some runs. So that's the overview of the activities for me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing, and thank you for joining us today. I'm, continue to appreciate the partnership with EGYM, and so excited about what you guys are doing to make an impact on the health of, the whole population, really, not just our, avid fitness users. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Thanks again for having me.